Northamptonshire Schools Forum. I'm going to, just for agenda item 1, is just hand over to Raj for details of apologies and forum membership changes.
Yep, so we've received apologies from Sandra Appleby and Siobhan Hearn. And regarding forum membership changes, Annabelle Moore has now replaced Lee Hughes as a as an Academy mainstream representative. And we have 2 new early years reps here with us today, Lisa Boyer and Lynn Bolland.
Perfect. Very welcome to Schools Forum for those new members. And I've also just received notification actually from Jo Sanchez-Thompson that she's resigning her position on Forum. She's currently in dispute with the local authority on a matter, or rather her trust is in dispute with local authority on a matter, and so has decided to resign from that post. I was absent. We'll move on to item number 2. I was absent for that meeting, so Paul very kindly chaired the meeting, but obviously we want to go through the minutes and check for both accuracy and also any matters arising from that. So first of all, are there any queries in terms of accuracy of the minutes from the last meeting on the 14th of December 2022? Okay, that's great. We'll take that as an accurate record. And in terms of matters arising, there are a number of things that I think then also appear on the agenda for today's meeting. Is there anything in terms of matters arising that is not covered by today's agenda that either officers or members of Forum would like to raise? Okay, I shall take silence as a no on that matter. And so we will move on to item number 3, which is budget update on the DSG. And I'm going to just hand over to Soraya for this item.
Thank you, Chair. So we're bringing to you a report which sets out the DSG budget based on the income and expenditure at the end of December 22. It's a updated report from the last report that we took to School Forum at the December School Forum. So going through the report, if you look at point 2, it's a breakdown of the DSG funding that we received for 22-23. So we've got a allocation of 333 million. Coming down to point 2.3, that's basically giving you a breakdown of what the recoupment is this year. So we've got a recoupment of 218 million, leaving us with 114 million to allocate out. Point 3 is the DSG update. So that is the table in point 3.1 is a summarized version of what the DSG forecast outturn is for this year so far. There has been a movement since December, and that takes us to a overspend of 303,000 in the DSG the whole DSG allocation. And most of it tends to relate to the high needs block. We've had there is a detailed analysis of each block, which is attached in the appendix that you've received. And most of the summary variances are kind of set out in 3.3 to 3.6 of the report. Going through 3.3, the schools block is forecasting an overspend of 0.329 million. That's unchanged from the last report. It still relates to Stanton Cross Primary Academy and classroom bulges. 3.4, the central schools block is still forecasting to come in within budget, and then 3.5 is now for high needs block is now forecasting an underspend of 0.053 million. Forecast has reduced since the last school report, because I think we were showing 1.380 million as the underspend last December at the School Forum, but we've we've done a lot of detailed work with the high needs team, and as a result of like increasing pressures for high needs places, additional EHCP plans, and there's been a lot of historical commitments that have had to be upheld. The high needs block forecast has been updated. There is like a detailed breakdown on Appendix A for each line, and comments given to what the variances relate to, which you can have a look at in a sec. And then 3.6 is the early years block. It's still showing it's the same forecasted overspend of 0.28, which was the maintained nursery school supplement, which is a reduction, is reduced due to participation numbers. Recommendation, well, if we go through the appendix first, which is Appendix A, you've got the schools block broken down line by line, which is what the recoupment is, what the transfer to high needs block will be, what the pupil growth fund difference is. So everything else is expected to come within budget. Just the pupil growth at the moment is showing as an overspend of 328,000. Next block is showing as the central schools block, which is all forecasted to come within budget. And then you've got the high needs block, which is broken down into the individual lines, and you've got details of why there's over or underspends on those lines. If you pick up like the SEN units, we've got like a 2 million over a 2 million underspend there, but that's because we put additional funding that was put in there for SEN units to be kind of opened up this year, but that's not happened this year. So going forward, I think into 23-24, they'll be kind of resolved in that year. We've got a lot of overspend in non-maintained and independent special school top-ups, which is like a 2 billion overspend, and that's mainly due to capacity levels being full in NNC special schools, so we're having to place pupils in independent special schools. I won't go through every single line on the high needs block, but you can see what the reasons are for each budget line to be over or underspend. And then beneath that, you've got the early years block, which is all forecasted to come within budget. Expect the overspend on maintained nursery school supplements, bringing us back to the overspend of 303,000. School forum are expected to just make a recommendation to take note of this, so there's no vote or anything like that on it. We will bring a updated paper in March's school forum, which will give us a more detailed under or overspend of what 22-23 will look like.
Thanks, Soraya. Just one question for me. That the issue about Stanton Cross Primary Academy, will that be rectified by the DFE next year or not? Because it just on the commentary, does that mean that because at the time of funding being allocated, the opening was not confirmed, that the local authority missed out on money from the DFE, or have I read that incorrectly?
I think Yoki explained that last time. It was the way that it's shared out. Is that right, Yoki?
If I can add to this, basically the way it works is that we get funded based on pupil numbers that are in schools during the October census. So as Stanton Cross opened in September 2022, we were not funded for Stanton Cross as at the previous funding allocation for 22-23, because it was based on October 21, and the school hasn't opened yet, hence the children haven't arrived yet. So what normally happens is the ESFA expect us to build this into our APT, but we wouldn't have received the funding for it. The funding will catch up obviously as the years go on. And so, for example, for 23-24, we would have Stanton Cross pupils there now, for the first year. However, they will be opening another class next year, so I will need to build in pupils for next September's intake and any other new schools that are opening. So for those schools, we aren't funded for those children.
Yeah, I see. So it's about kind of correctly allocating to the growth fund to ensure that if there are new schools that that the money is allocated, and then obviously, as you say, the lagged funding will catch up with it.
Well, with this, the ESFA expect us to actually build it into our APT.
Yeah.
So it's actually built as part of the funding formula. So it's not actually coming out of growth fund as such. They would have received the money as every other school in the in the county.
Okay. But it's in that Appendix A, it's showing in the growth fund line, isn't it?
Yes. Unfortunately for 22-23, Stanton Cross was not built into our APT when I set 22-23's budget last year. The DFE came subsequently to talk to us, and they said that it was missed off the APT because they did not show it as an opening, a proposed new school. So it wasn't picked up as a consequence.
I see. So that's why it appears in the pupil growth fund line for us.
Yeah, but it shouldn't do otherwise.
Yeah. No, understood. Angela, I think, has got hands up.
Hi, thank you. If I can just clarify in the high needs block for the early years SENEF, talking about a reduction or a forecast and underspend, I'd just like to say on behalf of the early years sector that it's been very, very difficult to apply for SENEF funding. It was very late coming on board. We had children who had been with us, our funding had been stopped in April, and we didn't actually get any opportunity to apply for SENEF until October. So although it may look like the forecast is extremely low, I think we had half a year when we weren't able to actually apply for that funding.
Okay, we'll take that on note, and the detailed report that we'll bring in March might change the forecast for SENEF at the moment, but it would be something that goes through the high needs team. So I don't know if Neil, do you want to comment on that one?
Well, only to agree with what Angela said. The process came through later than was anticipated. The allocation to SENEF was based on an estimate at the time, and I think we're developing that as we come on to, I think it's paper 9 when we set the budget for next year. We might want to come back to that, Angela, at that point rather than here, if that's okay.
Yeah, I just wanted it noted in finance, that was all.
Yeah. No, thanks, Angela. And Peter.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to ask a further question about Stanton Cross. I would have thought that Stanton Cross fall within a different funding model altogether because it's a free school, as I understand it, an academy, and therefore I would have thought there would have been a demonstration of pupil need in terms of data submitted to the DFE, and then a funding agreement agreed with the Secretary of State that would have allowed for a pre-opening allocation as well. So just wanted to query that in terms of how things now work with the local authorities setting up a new academy, financially, and also just a query about then what the funding model would be for Glenvale Park, which I think is the next free school academy coming on stream to be launched by the local authority, and we'll be interested to know what provision there is in this year's budgeting to support that, presuming that if there's a successful free school presumption bid competition this term and the awarding of the contract to a multi-academy trust, I would have thought that might have financial implications this year also. So and any comments on those matters would be much appreciated.
Who's best to take that? Is that Yoki? Yeah.
Can I answer that? Okay, so with Stanton Cross, the DFE missed Stanton Cross altogether out of our APT in 22-23. So the DFE did not pick it up. We weren't funded for Stanton Cross. However, later in the year, the DFE came to see us, and the DFE asked us, how do we propose to pay for Stanton Cross? It's now being recouped from us, from our Northamptonshire's DSJ, as part of the recruitment process. What we will do is we will pay obviously out of growth fund this year, but obviously it will take our growth fund to a deficit scenario. In answer to your question on Glenville Park is not expected to open in 23-24, so there is no provision for Glenville Park whatsoever. However, in 23-24, we do have Weldon Village Academy opening. Now, for this particular new school, there will be a 4-form entry. Again, we have not been funded by the DFE because, as you know, growth fund is actually based on the October, is a comparison of the growth between October 2021 and October 22 pupil numbers, and obviously it's not on that list. The DFE haven't funded us for this new school yet. So as a consequence, in providing for this, the budget for Weldon Village Academy, what has happened is I've had to build it into the APT, this 4-form entry opening. And obviously what it means is the budget share that is available to all schools in Northamptonshire obviously is very much reduced as a consequence, or in reality it is actually the growth fund element, because I have this time round given the maximum I could give all the schools in Northamptonshire, the maximum I could potentially give.
So Yoki, just to clarify, and Peter, you'll also have to let me know if this goes to the number of what you were asking, is that what you're saying is that there is no pre-opening funding available from the DFE. The local authority are expecting to foot the bill until such time as the lag funding then comes through to the school. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, Peter, I can see you got your hand up again. So,
yeah, thank you. Thank you, Yoki, for all the detail in your answer. That was very helpful. There were just two further things I wanted to explore. The first was just around process and procedure and how we work with the DFE. If the authority has a clear idea it's going to bring a new school, a new academy on stream, I would have thought that there ought to be an early conversation with the DFE in terms of gaining their support to financing that project, and for them to fully understand the need for the school and to be fully supported from the outset. It feels just as if, in terms of process and procedure, as if there's been a delay in terms of the local authority moving forward with the project, but communicating later in the day than perhaps ought to have been in terms of communications with the DFE. Now, I don't know if that's the case or not, but I'd just like to understand that a little bit more clearly. And the question around Glenville Park, yeah, I understand it. It won't be opening this September, so there aren't costs involved there. But I think what I was wanting to understand there was the need for a pre-opening allocation to the successful multi-academy trust, and therefore financial repercussions for the local authority, because there would need to be the awarding of funding to a multi-academy trust from the point when they are contracted to deliver the new school, which would be way ahead of the envisaged September 2024 opening.
Yeah, do you want to come on to that, Neil?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So in relation to communication with the DFE, when we meet with the DFE fortnightly, and I can assure you they are very, we are very clear about the upcoming school, demand for school places. And we meet with them termly, or sometimes more regularly than that, in terms of place planning and those sorts of things. They are very much aware. The issues Yoki are describing are process issues. There was an issue with Stanton Cross. Okay, the issue with Stanton Cross was the legalities to allow the school to open were done at the 11th hour, it's fair to say, and there was a question mark about whether it was going to open or not right up until July preceding its opening. So that was a bit of an oddity because of legalities around, it was actually around the site in the end, but there were concerns with those other ones, Glenville Park, Weldon Village, and the future ones that come on beyond that. The DFE are very clearly cited on that and support us, but the process is exactly as Yoki's described. The lagged funding, we build this within growth fund and other elements, and like I say, Yoki's explained that much better than I can. In terms of pre-opening funding, yes, we do get into that conversation. Clearly for Glenvale Park, that will be in next financial year now. If it's not opening until September 2024, it would usually come through in the 24-25 budget process, and would be something we'd want to have a conversation with. Obviously, we have those conversations with Weldon as well about what that looks like. So they are things that we would enter into the conversation with. There is funding. I believe there's funding through the DFE as well for newly opening academies. Certainly there was for Stanton Cross, I'm aware, and obviously the capital support that goes with that. So, like I say, I think Stanton Cross is not a good example of how the process should work. So it's slightly odd. The ones going forward hopefully will be finalised in the timely fashion, rather than, like I say, becoming an 11th hour issue. And the funding is exactly as Yoki's set out, and we will bring that through the forum as we go forward, saying actually next year this is the school that are opening going beyond that point, because there will be further schools beyond Glenvale Park, as you know, through people growth. We're expecting additional schools beyond that, Hamwood and others as well, that we need a conversation about. So hopefully that gives you some reassurance that the DFE and ourselves are talking. We do have an oversight of it, but sometimes, you know, issues delay the finalisation of the funding.
Yeah, so to summarise, essentially for the 2 new schools that are coming on board, you're not expecting this same issue to arise again.
We're not expecting it to be 11th hour, absolutely not. So Weldon Village again is going to open, so we know that, so we can build it into the APT as exactly as Yoki said, you know, and get the funding ahead of ourselves, rather than as Yoki says, we got into a position where Stanton Cross wasn't on the APT because no one knew if it was going to open, and then suddenly those issues resolved and it did, and we moved on from that point. So it wasn't a good example of how the process should work. So hopefully the others will go more smoothly. Yes.
Great, thanks. Peter, I think your hand's still up. Do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, thanks very much, Neil, for the reassurance around Glenvale Park. That's reassuring to know. I'm just a little bit puzzled by the legalities being resolved at the 11th hour, and what exactly that means, and what that says in relation to process and procedure leading up to that. I just can't quite understand how we got to a position where, for such a significant development with a new school, there was a legal hitch at the 11th hour. I'm just puzzled by that. Would be interested to understand more. And just in terms of the Glenvale Park issue, I appreciate we're looking at a year hence, really, in terms of the school opening. But as I understand it, there will be a free school competition in February, and then an awarding of the contract. So I'm still interested to understand, surely there would need to be an allocation of funding this year to the successful Multi Academy Trust, but perhaps that's not the case.
So very, very briefly to answer those 2 questions, right, Chair, going in reverse order. In relation to the competition, yes, that's opening in February. Yes, we'll be putting that through. In terms of funding from us, that would be in the following financial year. The DFE provides some funding prior to that. So, but we will work together on that and have a conversation about that. In terms of the legalities around Stanton Cross, without going into huge amounts of detail, it was about land transfer. So the developer of the site, there was a public open space that is outside of Stanton Cross. If you've been to see the school, it's a really impressive looking school, really like it, like the design. There was a public open space outside, and the legalities of the transfer of that and the maintenance ongoing were the thing that that held up. And you know, I agree with you. You know, considering the importance of having a school and the investment in the school, that sort of thing, it seems like a very minor issue. But you know, it was with the legal departments of the DFE, the developer, and the council, and it wasn't certain that we would have got we would get there. I mean, we pushed very, very hard and made sure we did. And I don't think it was particularly anybody's fault. It was just complicated. And like I say, we could provide more details if it's helpful, but actually that's the bottom line. It was a complicated land transfer, and we got there in the end.
No, thanks, Neil. I think that's really useful, Neil, to know. Yeah, really useful to know. Rob Hardcastle.
Thanks, Chair. My question is 2 parts, and it's regarding the high needs block. When we looked at the pack from the 14th of December 2022, and you looked at the DSG update on item 3, almost all the DSG blocks, schools block, central block, and early years block they're almost identical to what we have in this report. The high needs block has had a really significant shift in a month, and it worries me a little bit that we've had. I mean, we're talking almost a £1.5 million shift. It was 50,990,000. It's gone to 52,317,000. So I'm just interested in why has there been such a shift in the high needs block, what we're forecasting over what is the period of less than 4 weeks. And also, obviously, I'm sure other committee members are interested. We clearly are having a budget problem with both our out of county special top-ups and our non-maintained and independent special top-ups. I mean, we're talking about 3.1 million, and I'm sure the committee are worried about that, because we set our budgets for those. And I'd just like the second part, I'd like to understand why we have been so wildly off in terms of what we forecast for 22-23 on that.
That may be me also, Chair, but Yuki and Sarai, please feel free to input. In terms of the change in the high needs block, it is significant. What I'd say to you is we are significantly more confident in a figure before you now than we were in December. The reason for the shift, there's a number of reasons for the shift. A significant chunk is historic. Some one-off historic liabilities were identified that were actually not within the, hadn't been accounted for. And actually dated back until the start of NNC, so actually related to 2021. You know, is that long ago? And there's some work that went on around that. But equally, what's hidden within what you see there is a lot of work that Nicola Jones and the team have done, where we've significantly reduced the call on the out borough type costs, because we've been through every single pupil with the individual school. And found savings within that where historic agreements needed to be updated, and we could backdate that and make that work. I think what the difference is, though, is that we've done a huge amount of work over the last 2 months to understand the historic calls on the high needs block. And when we get onto paper 9 again, I think what you see is we're setting a budget much more on a basis of an understanding at an individual pupil level of the costs, rather than a continuation of what's happened in the past, which is why it's been around. The other thing, of course, as Soraya alluded to in her introduction, is we put money into the units budget, but actually those units are coming through more slowly, and that's reasonable. And so other elements have made up for that. So we've had to move money around within the high needs block. And it's fair to say the high needs block budget, when it was set, you know, this time last year, you know, it was based on the information we had at that point in time, and we've come a very, very long way from that. So I guess my reassurance to you is I think we are much more confident on the figures we're presenting to you now. Last times were presented in good faith, but actually we've found, you know, done a lot of work on that, and that will be developed and is reflected in paper 9 when we come onto the budget setting process that's set out before you. Finally, yes, we are worried about individual elements of the high needs block, and that's why we've been through at a pupil level to address those for out borough and those sorts of things, and that work is ongoing. So once again, I think you'll find as we move forward there'll be a much more strategic oversight of expenditure within the high needs block that will enable us to take action that will address the pressures that we have. What I have to say, the final thing I'll say, Chair, and sorry for the long answer, is we're in a very unusual position. The figures you've got before you, like I say, that we have some confidence in now, you know, we've come a long way, you know, still demonstrate the DSG, the high needs bit element of the DSG is within budget. It's a very, very unusual position to be in for local authorities at this point in time. If we projected that forward, I think we would be looking that, you know, that would lead us to a deficit position if we took no action. So what we need to be doing is taking action so that doesn't happen. But like I say, we are in a very unusual position. And if we look at authorities around the country, you know, holding deficits within the high needs block of 100%, you know, or 100% overspent or carry forward deficit of the high needs block budget, you know, we are in a fortunate position, and I think we can build on that going forward to ensure that we use the money as effectively as possible. So like I say, I hope that gives you some reassurance. As Soraya said, we'll come back in March with even more detail, and hopefully, well, not hopefully, I'm sure the figures won't have swung quite in anywhere near as much, but that will be refined even further.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. And I think that reassurance is really important, because I think, you know, Rob's question, and you know, and all members of Forum will be aware that, you know, probably on establishment, you know, the high needs block spending was completely out of control, and I think it's a really positive thing how that has come back in line. And you know, I suspect, especially for members that have been with Forum some time, is what we wouldn't wish to see is a return to the days when that wasn't the case and it wasn't being well monitored and managed. And I think, hence the importance of sort of exploring those movements today. Rob, do you want to say anything further on that?
No, I'll probably just back up what you said there, James, really, to say it is a big swing, but I am pleased that you feel there's the confidence behind it. And I know the work that Nicola and the team have been doing in terms of making sure that they've got a real grip on every single placement and the cost of those and making some savings on that. I suppose the only other thing would be, I think the bit that I thought was new on there was the tri-part residential placement. That didn't appear to have a budget at all, but suddenly it was a 750,000 sort of spend. And I'm assuming, Neil, that's the historical, or partly at least the historical bits that you were talking about before.
Yeah, just to come out very briefly, Chair. Yeah, absolutely. So agreements were made, and what it says tripart, this is placements that are funded by social care, education and health jointly, and it was historic commitments in that area where we've obviously got a commitment to be made, but that has had to, a lot of work's had to go into that to unpick those to ensure we are paying the right amount. Clearly we want to pay our share, but equally we don't want to pay too much, and that's why we've got that in there. In what you'll see in future years is that doesn't appear as a separate budget because it'll appear in the other lines. So rather than doing it separately, if we've got, for example, I don't know, an outborough residential, it would come in that line rather than being identified separately. We've identified it separately this year for the reason you've identified, that it is something that was not budgeted to begin with at the start here.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. And I'll hand over to Robert Tate.
Well, thank you. Just really to repeat what James and Rob said about the figures, I was going to say similar, so it's really confidence building to hear that the historic things are being resolved. And I trust that means that when it comes to variances, what Neil's saying, that it'd be more about explaining how they change because of change in need or a change in direction for strategy. Because there's some big variances here, which would be really shame to repeat some of the previous things. Can I just go back a little bit to the growth funding? That's right. Can I ask, is it normal for this forum to have a detailed schedule of what the funding is made up school by school and how that addresses pupil need?
That is something I think. Do you mean in terms of the new schools and new places coming online and where and when those are required? So I think I probably need someone to refresh my institutional memory. So I think there is a point in the year in which there is a document forwarded about potential new schools and estimations of pupil number, but I would struggle to remember in which month's meeting that is. I don't know if any other members can either remember or whether officers know where that's scheduled.
So I don't know where it's scheduled generally, Chair, but I would agree with you that should be coming through. And obviously it links to the consultation that we do, which always seems a very long way in advance to me, around admission policies and those sorts of things. So it might well be linked to that. So it might come in the summer, I would think, in preparation for the consultation on admission arrangements for the year after that, if you see what I mean, because we're always working 18 months ahead, aren't we, through admissions processes. So it might well be lined up with that.
Yeah, I mean, in answer to the question, there is a point in the year at which we see information regarding the demand for places and proposed new schools.
Thank you. Yeah, I raise it now because I think the council submission for the APT is the end of Jan. Am I right, Ayaki? Yeah. So
can I answer that?
Yeah, please do. Yeah. Tomorrow. And we're confident that obviously we've got everything we need in there.
I've been in discussions with News, head of place planning. So
thanks.
Usually there is a report that comes on Growth Fund round about in the October forum, where it sets out, all the number of, expected growth fund we will hope to have for the coming year. And it goes out to consultation for forum to agree in December.
Perfect. Thanks, Yoki. Okay, I shall close that item there unless any further comments. I can't see any other hands up. So yeah, thanks ever so much for that. So we'll move on to item number 4, which is the proposed scheme for financing schools. And it's over to Salik to introduce this one.
Thank you, Chair. I bring a report to School Forum. Just a quick update of our scheme of financing school. I would like School Forum to note the content of the scheme, and later on we'll have a vote regarding if that scheme goes through approval and publication of the scheme. So the changes to the scheme of financing, DFE did not change anything as per their guidance at the moment, but that might change later on because they usually issue their guidance in May. The key change as per the outcome of December 22 forum was the addition of 2 clauses below, which are in section 2.2 and section 2.10, which is provision of financial information reports. So now the schools are required to submit the bank account and VAT returns on a monthly basis. And if in an event of that school fails to submit that required bank account twice without providing a satisfactory explanation, it is noted that funding may be withheld until the return is received. It is important for schools to stay in their current reporting obligation in order to avoid any potential delays in the funding. And at the authority will be creating a tracker which tracks the submission date and when that submission is submitted to the LA and the reasons that it hasn't. And the second change was to the financial forecast, where schools are required to submit budget monitoring on a quarterly basis. And once again, the funding may be withheld if 2 returns are missed until a return is received. We will give it due note to any extraordinary circumstances, as mentioned in the December School Forum. And, we do understand if staff members are ill or something's gone wrong and the return cannot be made, as long as they make the LA aware, we can have that discussion with that school. Once again, these changes are set out in section 2.2 and 2.10. And the key reason for this is to make exec reporting in line with the NNT exec report. So we can report to execs, DSG and school on a monthly basis. And this will also allow us to bring forth to School Forum on whatever schedule we agree on in terms of where the schools are throughout the year and what their balances are looking like and where we can intervene and support schools where need be. So the recommendations for the School Forum are to approve the draft scheme for 23-24 and note there might be changes if DFE update the guidance in the year. And the next steps are that we need a School Forum vote for maintained schools only.
Sorry, muted myself. Perfect. Thanks ever so much, Salik, for that. Yeah, and really clear on sort of the rationale for those changes. So any questions for Salik on that before we move to a vote? Marie.
Hi, thank you, Chair. Will there be any training upcoming for school bursars and business managers on managing that new system?
Yeah, so we are in process of producing process maps and procedures going forward. So we'll be issuing out a timetable to give school ample time in order for them to submit their returns and subsequently train or support schools in order for them to submit their claims.
Thank you. Anything else? And just to be clear on the vote, the vote is actually only for maintained school representatives. Is that correct?
Yes.
Perfect. That's great. So if we move to that vote, I am aware that we've had apologies from our only representative of maintained secondary schools, so they won't be participating in that. So this vote is only for members of maintained primary schools. So all those in favour of approving the proposed scheme for financing schools, please can you raise your hand? If you keep that up so that Raj can just do the count.
Yeah, got that.
Thank you. And votes against approval of the draft scheme? And any abstentions? Perfect. Thanks very much. Thank you. So there's no vote required on this next item. It's essentially information on the DSG settlement and other grants, and it's Yoki who's going to introduce item number 5.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, this is an obviously this is an update on the DSG settlement and other grants. Okay, so the DFE released our budget settlement on the 16th of December. Our total settlement for 23-24 is 354.963 million. Now, what you see here is a DSG that has been amended in that this is the settlement that the DFE have given it to us for 23-24. However, you cannot compare it like for like in, you know, with the 22-23 settlement. This is because the DFE have brought in 23-24 the school supplementary grant, which I've tried to show in this table below, where into the schools block. So you're not really comparing like with like unless you bring in the school supplementary grant that you have received, schools have received as a separate grant in 22-23, as well as in the earliest block, the DFE have brought in the teachers' pay and pension grant into the 3- and 4-year-old funding, as well as the maintained nursery school supplement. So in doing so, what I've done here is I've actually brought in I've shown you the 22-23 DSG allocation by bringing in the school supplementary grant and the teachers pay grant for 22-23. You will then have an adjusted amount for 22-23 for DSJ. I have then compared it against the provisional NFF allocation that was released in July 2022, and now how it's actually changed in the December settlement. Now the net change is overall, for schools block is actually 3.1%. For central services block, it's gone down by 7.86%. Now this is taking into account the ongoing reduction, the 20% reduction of our historical commitments. The high needs block has gone up substantially by 10.46%, and early years block has gone up slightly by 4.38%. So what I've tried to then illustrate to you in this report is the changes. Now, the main changes, as you can see, is we've had a reduction in primary pupil numbers, but we have had a significant increase in secondary school numbers. Our growth funding has reduced. It's reduced by 37K. Now, this is obviously evident that, the growing schools like Stanton Cross and, Weldon Village Academy coming on board has not been taken into account as a consequence. So as they have rolled the school supplementary grant into 23-24, I've made that comparison against my adjusted column here, and you can see the difference. Now, schools, as you know, Schools Forum can decide to transfer up to 0.5% out of schools block to other blocks like high needs block, and any transfers greater than 0.5%, we will need the approval of the Secretary of State. We can also set aside growth fund from schools block to address growth in schools. We can also set up a falling pupil roll fund if we wish to, but we have discussed this in previous Schools Forum, and it's not a route that I believe Schools Forum would like to take unless you change your minds again. Schools block is obviously used to finance individual school budgets. So the detailed operational guidance you can find, I've shared the link with you. Central School Services block, overall, as our pupils have increased by 379 pupils, our Central School Services block is slightly higher than what was previously reported, at the past two Schools Forum meetings. So I've adjusted the budgets to reflect the increase for Central School Services block, which is set out in a different agenda item. High needs block. Now, the big winner for high needs block this time round is there is like 22-23, the DFE have built in an additional high needs allocation into the high needs block. So for 23-24, we've got an additional 2.32 million. I mean, in 22-23, we received 1.889 million at the 11th hour, but this time around, they've actually built it into a high needs block. Now, on what the DFE have asked that with this additional high needs funding, the DFE are expecting us to passport this on to special schools, alternative provisions, and proves that is under, that belongs to us. As we only have special schools, this 3.4% will be, be added to that special schools budget share that we fund. Earliest block, as I explained earlier, the thing that has changed, the significant thing that has changed is that the DFE have rolled in the teachers' pay and pension grant into the 3- and 4-year-old funding, as well as the maintain nursery school supplement. So as a consequence, again, I've had to bring in the two lines, to demonstrate that, what the real net increase is in, earliest block. Now, what this does mean for Schools Forum is that in order to protect schools and academies that previously used to receive teachers' pay and pension grants separately, we've had to build in an additional fund, supplement factor into the earliest national funding formula for Northamptonshire. So in a later paper, Schools Forum will be asked to approve this additional factor to be added to our schools funding formula, to our earliest national funding formula, so that the schools and academies with nursery pupils can actually be protected for the quality element of it. Now, the new thing that's happening in 23-24 is the DFE have actually given in recognition of the additional pressure schools are actually facing. The DFE have given Northamptonshire an additional 9.09 million. This is for the new grant, which they've called Mainstream Schools Additional Grant. Now, this is similar to the school supplementary grant that we received in 22-23, but they've given it a new name, obviously, to avoid getting mixed up with the existing school supplementary grant. The DFE have said that come 24-25, this grant will be rolled into schools block, just like school supplementary grant. This grant is meant for primary and secondary schools only. Special schools will get it through the additional high needs funding, which I've illustrated before, which is what the 3.4% is. The other additional requirement by the DFE also is that we are required to ensure that there is a 3% increase from 21-22 funding levels for special schools total funding, as well as the 3.4% additional high needs funding. These are the proposed funding rates for the mainstream schools additional grant. For pupil premium, the rates will increase by 5%, and these are the new rates that you see before you going forward for 23-24. All other grants will be informed of them as the year progresses. Schools Forum are asked to note the contents of this report. This is more for your information at this stage. Thank you.
Thanks, Yoki. Rob, I think see your hand up there.
Yeah, only a really small question on this one. Yoki, you talked about the schools block, and that included a drop in the growth funding of about £37,000, I think. I'm just going to ask again about Stanton Cross. obviously Stanton Cross wasn't was one that we sort of had to take out of the growth funding because of the APT and etc. And we don't need to go over that because Neil's given a very clear answer as have you previously. But you mentioned that Stanton Cross was still affecting the growth funding. Can you just explain to me how that is the case? Because I'm not clear on that.
Okay, so in 22-23, Stanton Cross was paid out of growth fund. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now in 23-24, I've had to build Stanton Cross and Weldon Village Academy into the APT. What this means is the overall pot of schools block, what I can give schools or to schools and to growth fund, you know, the pot of growth fund itself is obviously dictated by the number of schools, the number of pupils I have to, you know, allocate to schools. So with me building in 2 form entry at Stanton Cross, so Stanton Cross has come through the data set for 23-24 based on the data set for 23-24 APT is October 22. So Stanton Cross pupils as at October 22 have come through the APT data set. However, the next intake, i.e. the September 23 intake, is not on the APT. I need to build that in. So by building that in, I will have to fund that school for the next financial year, which, as it's an academy, it will start from September 23 onwards. But it is coming from our 23-24 financial year's DSJ. The same principle applies for Weldon Village Academy as well.
Okay, so I think what you're saying is it's just a case of the fact that at the moment Stanton Cross, for example, has 1 class in reception, and
yeah,
that will go through to, and that must be already included in the formula because that goes through to year 1, but then they've got 2 classes starting in reception in September of next year. So they've had
and those 2 classes are not funded.
And those classes, and that's what you're talking about. It's that element that's on the growth funding, isn't it?
It's not on the growth fund. It's actually built into the APT. So because I built it into the APT, it is what the DFE call as implicit growth. So it's actually within APT itself. Whereas those that we fund outside of APT, i.e. things like bulge classes, you know, because of pupil arriving in year unexpectedly, like the Ukrainian children, that's what comes out, that what create the bulges in schools. And so as a consequence, we would fund that out of growth fund.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Yoki. Thanks. Robert.
Thank you. Just got 2 little questions of clarification for myself, please. So it's table F in the high needs block in the DSG report. Yeah, there's a line on there what seems to be repeating, which is a negative of 1.5 million. It's repeated last year, 22-23 and 23-24. Is that going to be ongoing, that adjustment?
Which line is that?
It's about 4th line down, import-export adjustment based on January 22 census.
Yeah.
Is that going to finish the year after next, or is that?
The import and export adjustment at the moment it's showing the same because obviously the DFE have not updated this for 23-24 yet. They will do once they have completed the exercise in the summer. Normally this amendment comes in the summer.
If I can add to that, if I can add to that, Chair. So the purpose of this is for cross-border special educational needs. So it's an ongoing issue, Robert, that, you know, each year either more pupils flow out of Northampton into other local authorities or into Northampton from other local authorities, and where appropriate, the DFE do an adjustment, and that's what Yoki's saying absolutely right. It hasn't been updated as yet, so the figure's shown us the same, but it's an ongoing issue. It's not an adjustment, if you like.
But it's always likely to be a broadly similar amount, or could that vary wildly, and what impact might?
Well, it's unlikely to vary. Sorry, Yoki, but it's unlikely to vary wildly because, of course, once children are in a school, they're likely to stay there the 7 years of going through the schools. You're unlikely to move significant cohorts in 1 year. Over time, it will shift because we'd hope to be educating more children in borough, locally, holding them and those sort of things. You'd like to think that we'd be sending very few children out of borough to, but there will always be occasions when that has to happen because of need and those sorts of things. So no, it would be very unlikely to 1 year be 150,000 one way and then suddenly next year be 300,000 the other way, because that number of cohort of children is unlikely to shift into a different pattern of delivery, but it will shift over time.
Yeah, perfect. That's great. Robert, I'll come back to you. Yeah.
So just to clarify, so the figure matches for me. It matches for transfer from the schools block. So I'm looking at table 5 of a high needs block funding allocation paper. And I'm hearing Yoki say that we're not going to transfer any money from the schools block in 23-24. So my second point was a case of just to acknowledge that that's putting a 1.5 million pressure on the high needs block compared to this year, if I pick that out right. But that line is exactly the same figure like Neil talks about with transfers in and out, but it matches the school block transfer. So I can't see in 23-24 we haven't got it. So I'm just wondering how it. I just want to acknowledge that there's a 1.5 million pressure from this year to next year because we're not going to top it up by 0.5% for the school block, if that's what we're saying. So the gap and increase in funding is actually going to go less way, less distance. But sorry, Neil, I can't understand that explanation. It matches perfectly for transfer from school block, and the figures for 23-24 don't seem to match it.
I'm not sure that is the title right on that line, Yoki, because that is the transfer. The import export is as I've described, but that may not be the amount that's there. I think that title is wrong. Okay. I think that is the transfer from schools block, is it?
That is the official, the words on that table, they are the official words of the DFE. It's on the allocation sheets.
Yeah, but I think what Robert's saying and what Neil's saying is that Neil's explanation matches the title on the line about individual learner records and an import-export adjustment, but it can't just be coincidence that amount is the equivalent to the adjustment from the schools block last year, which obviously won't be there this year, or is that a coincidence?
That adjustment is in our DSG allocation, in the published DSG allocation, so you can actually check it online. It's published by the DFE.
So, Robert, I think I'm going to need some help. So if I look at paper 9, which is jumping ahead, I know, in paper 9, the transfer from the schools block to the high needs block is 1.2 million. I think that's the amount I would be expecting it to be. I wouldn't be expecting it to be 1.5 million, I don't think.
Yeah, I've added that on the CSSB, I don't know what it stands for, but M2 together equal it.
That's
but it shows
Central School Services block.
Oh, thank you. But like Yoki said, there's no transfer expected from the schools block in 23-24, which is what number 5 in that paper shows.
Yeah.
And the figures at the bottom match perfectly this table, but I'm not seeing where the 1.5 million negative is from. I just try to understand that when we're putting 1.5 million more pressure on the spend because we're not transferring that school, or 1.2, Neil, from what you say, 1.2 million. But the other point is that looks like a narrative from like the other year. Is that going to carry on every year, that adjustment?
Okay, so I can answer one part of that. So Schools Forum had the conversation at the last meeting and the meeting before that that we would not do a transfer because we hold a surplus in the dedicated schools grant overall of over 2 million, and the high needs block, whilst the underspend has reduced, as you've seen this time, that is kind of a one-off, as I've described earlier, and so it wouldn't be appropriate given the pressures on schools' budgets to ask for a transfer at this point, although we may have to revisit that for next year. I'm confused by the figures, and we may have to come back to you on that, Robert, because, like I said, I'm clear on what import-export is, and that's not the same as the transfer from the CSSB, and the schools block. So we might have to come back to you with some clarity on that, because
they're different things.
Yeah, but if they match, then they shouldn't match. If they match, then that worries me.
They're different things. They're not the same thing. The import and export adjustments is something that the DFE does for, you know, movement of pupils between local authorities.
Yeah, so I think that would be great if officers could take that away and then clarify it. And probably the point is that the import-export adjustment will be something that is always there, because there will always be a adjustment depending on students in and students out of the local authority. The question, I guess, for officers, just to clarify, is that are those the right figures, and what are the figures for the previous year when there was a transfer into the high needs block? And you're quite right that, I mean, although it is a vote coming up, I think, in the next item, that the steer thus far from Schools Forum has been not to make that transfer for this year. Paul.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Just a quick question from me is, Yoki, we've got the 3.4% increase in funding to the special schools and APs and others. Is that on top of the normal, an increase that comes through based on the 10% increase in funding? Is it in addition to that for special schools? That was the first part of the question. Okay, so for special schools, in 23-24, their total funding needs to be 3% higher than 21-22's level of funding over the 2 years. Okay. So what this means is that's the first criteria. They need to be 3% they need to have 3% MFG. Okay, for special schools. The second criteria is based on what we will give them in 23-20. Based on what we gave them in 22-23, it needs to be 3.4% higher. That's the second criteria. So there's two elements to it. And that bit will come from the additional high needs funding allocation. Okay, that's lovely, thank you. And I think, sorry, just going back to, I was just looking at the figures, Robert, that you were talking about earlier. I think that the answer to the question you'd had is they are two very similar figures, but not exactly the same figures in relation to that import-export adjustment. So whilst they are very similar, they are not the same thing, and that the increasing funding and the balancing through effectively makes the need for not having the transfer to the DSG. Apologies for the background noise, by the way.
No, thanks, Paul, and thanks for clarifying that. That's really useful. Okay, I shall move us on to item number 6, and there are a number of votes for this particular item, and I think thanks, Yoki, for setting these out so clearly as separate actions. I think as well, there's I probably need some guidance from Raj, because there are some items that I think are for everyone on forum to vote on, and some which will be for maintained schools only. So we'll make sure we clarify before each vote on that. So yeah, Yoki, over to you really for any instructions on item number 6.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Okay, so schools block budget. As you know, I brought before you a proposal of how to set schools block budget for 23-24 at the December Schools Forum. I consulted with schools of the various options. Basically, I am required to set the schools budgets, the mainstream schools budget, with a minimum funding guarantee between 0 and 0.5%. That is the maximum the DFE will allow local authorities to set the school budgets on. Anything over and above that would have required a Secretary of State decision, and it is more than unlikely that
the Secretary of State will not agree to it unless there were really serious mitigating circumstances. This is what the DFE said. The reason for that is because 23-24 is the first year of moving closer to the national funding formula. Now the DFE hopes to move to a national funding formula, you know, within the next 5 years, basically. So 23-24 is the first year of moving closer to the national funding formula. Local authorities are meant to mirror the NFF. You know, they need to move 10% closer, and local authorities are meant to mirror the NFF eventually. Now, as you know, we have moved on to the national funding formula, so we are already classified and deemed to mirror the NFF. So we have overcome that hurdle. So what I've asked from Schools Forum in December was that we adopt the area cost adjustment adjusted national funding formula values, i.e. I give you a slightly enhanced, level of funding for each of your funding formula factors. I've also asked for Forum to consider the use of the current local factor split sites, because the DFE have yet to instruct us of how to progress based on their recent consultation last year. So they are still deciding on that. So we still have to use our current local factor split sites, which I have done. Schools Forum agreed at the December Forum to set our minimum funding guarantee at the maximum possible, which is at 0.5%. And obviously, following that, anything that's left from schools block, we have two options. We have three options. We can either transfer everything to high needs block that's left behind, or transfer everything to growth fund, or to share it between high needs block and growth fund. Okay. So what I've done here is I've actually, Schools Forum also agreed to delegate £3.56 for trade union facility time and £12 for school effectiveness at the last Schools Forum. So when the DFE confirmed our settlement in December, I then set about, setting the schools funding formula. I have shared with you the detailed workings of what the outcome is. I have also, run the formula as was agreed with Schools Forum in December. What this meant was, I only have the rest of this paper explains the schools block. But having set the formula, what this actually means is I was only left with 336K, I believe, to do whatever decision Schools Forum wish me to take, before I submit the schools funding formula. My paper here sets out, the schools block DSG, like I explained earlier, when I ran the schools funding formula, what the impact of it is. I've also gone on to explain a little bit about the growth fund, how the number of, growing schools, schools with growth in them, and, how the growth fund was calculated for Northamptonshire, and how I've adopted the use of our our ACA adjusted NFF values, funding formula values. And what it means is I've only left with £336,833 left in the schools block funding. Now, I need a decision from you today whether you wish me to put the rest of this funding in People Growth Fund, or you would like me to move it to high needs block, which equates to 0.12% of schools block. It's not a lot, but that's all I have left. I've done this, in consultation with yourselves. I've done what you would like me to do, i.e. is to give schools the maximum minimum funding guarantee possible. As you can see, if you look at some of the numbers, I've given schools as much as I can, even we are very fortunate in that we haven't got many schools that actually rely on our MFG now, because we've moved over to the national funding formula. I try to, I think somewhere along my report here, I've tried to explain what the percentages are. So, just trying to find it, hold on. Yeah, in my paper, I try to explain to you, what the minimum per pupil level funding, how many primary schools is protected, and how many secondary schools is protected. And then when we gave schools a maximum MFG of 0.5%, how many schools, failed to receive it and was protected as a consequence. And there were 7 primary schools involved. So as you can see, the total of MFG we rely on was only 30, on here, it was £37,818. So my recommendation to Schools Forum is to approve the MFG to be set at 0.5%, to indicate your support for the funding formula for 23-24 as set out in section 4, to consider the 2 options I've asked above, and also the delegation of £3.56 per pupil for trade union facilities time and £12 for school effectiveness. And if there's any other points you wish to convey to executive for the deliberations in approving the DSG budget for 23-24. Schools Forum view is important here because obviously it will shape the executive and council's decision in approving our schools funding formula. Thank you.
Thanks, Yoki. I'm just probably after a slight bit of advice, possibly from Raj here, because I think on each of these decisions, from looking at December meetings, that actually Forum had already taken a view on each of these that's there in the minute. So I just want to check what the status of this vote would be and actually whether or not it's required.
Yeah, it was most of these recommendations were voted on at the previous meeting, but I mean, if officers have included them in reports for it to be voted on again at this meeting, I don't see why we can't do that. Maybe.
Can I comment on that, Chair?
Yeah, please do.
I think previously you voted on the principle of what was happening. Yoki's now given us more detail, so there's still the opportunity to take a different view should you wish to do so. Whether you do that through a vote or not, I think it's up to you as the group. But I think last time we were just saying Yoki did a good paper in principle about, is this the approach we'd like to take? So we've done that. We've now exemplified that for you to take a view on.
Perfect. Okay. So now the vote that is being asked for is essentially based on the real figures are populated rather than a vote in principle.
Yeah.
Okay. Fine. And I think kind of that section E about any points to convey to the executive is probably perhaps the points that are raised in the discussion now, if people have anything to put forward to. So obviously I would, invite members for a forum for any questions or comments. Okay, in which case it's probably I'm probably happy to go through and move each to a vote. Can I also just check that I think under item D, the D delegation, that would only be for maintained schools to vote on. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
And everything else would be for Forum as a whole?
Yes.
Perfect, thanks. So we'll take each item in turn. So obviously this is for all Forum members to vote upon, and it is seeking approval that the MFG minimum funding guarantee is set at 0.5% for 23-24. So all those in favour, if they could raise their hands, please.
Yeah, noted.
And votes against the proposal to set MFG at 0.5%. And any abstentions? Thank you. And the next one, section point B, which is an indication of support for approval of the funding formula for 2023-24 as set out in the paper. All those in favour, if you could raise your hands, please.
Yeah, okay.
Any votes against? And any abstentions? And for item C, I think given the fact that Forum has previously indicated approval for the option of transferring that excess into the growth fund, then I think that's probably the proposal we should vote on initially. So the proposal is that I don't have the figure to hand, but approximately £300,000 should go into the growth fund for 2023-24. So votes in favour for that proposal.
Yeah, I've got that.
Votes against?
Okay.
Thanks. And abstentions? Thank you. And the final vote is for maintained schools only, and again we're missing our representative from maintained secondary schools, but it is approval of dedelegation and the proposed rates for dedelegation for both trade union time and for the school effectiveness for teams for maintained schools. So approval of those rates as set out in the paper. Votes for, please.
Yep, unanimous.
Perfect. Thanks, Raj. So if unanimous, we obviously won't need to proceed to the final two. Thanks ever so much. And do members have anything just under point E, of anything that they wish to go forward to the executive of part of their deliberations with the DSG budget? Perfect. Okay, we shall move on to item number 7, which is sorry, Neil, I could just see your hand up there.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come back to the item before that. It is a coincidence that those two figures that Robert identified are similar. So I'd never noticed it before, so hence us all looking shocked and thinking, oh dear, has this gone wrong? But no, they are. So the import-export duty is 1,542,000, and the transfers was 1,542,700 and something. Just as a comparison, the import-export duty last year was 1.614 million. So just go back to your point, it doesn't shift significantly year on year, although that moves actually. Just want to give colleagues reassurance that the figures you've got in front of you are correct. It's just that we'd never noticed that those two figures were quite as close as they were when you added them together. So apologies for that.
No, that's great, Neil. Thanks for clarifying, and thanks to Robert for being eagle-eyed and spotting the similarity. That's great. Okay, so item number 7, which is about central school services block budgets. And again, there is a vote required from Forum to agree the proposals for the 2023-24 education functions to be completed at the end of this item. All yours, Yoki.
Thank you, Chair. Agenda item 7, I've brought before Schools Forum. This is basically a reconfirmation of our Central School Services block. I've said before you in previous Schools Forum meetings our proposal for Central School Services block. The numbers haven't changed significantly. It's just the fact that we have had an additional, because of the increase in pupil numbers, as you know, we've had an increase of 379 pupils. It meant that, our CSSB have increased slightly, but overall the budget headings where we're proposing to spend the budgets are as set out before in previous meetings. The only difference is with the increase in pupil numbers, that slight increase in funding under ongoing responsibilities. I have just added it onto the statutory and regulatory duties and taken into account the latest costs for national copyright licenses which all schools receive. So that is all that has changed. What I'm asking for is for Schools Forum to agree to the central school services block expenditure in this paper, because obviously we will use this to set the budget for 23-24 going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Yoki. Any questions or comments? Okay, we'll move directly to the vote here. All those in favour of approving the plans for central expenditure from the Central School Services block, if you could raise your hands to vote for approval.
Yeah, okay.
Votes against? And abstentions? Okay, thanks very much. And for item 8, this is for 23-24 early years block budget. And I'm going to hand over to Judy to introduce this report.
Thank you, Chair. Raj, would you be able to share my slides, please?
Yeah, sure. 1 second.
Thank you. So this paper is being brought to Forum to outline the proposed early years funding block budget for 23-24. In late December, I think it was on the 16th of December last year, the budgets that were currently based on January 2022 census figures were released to the local authority. They were a little late in coming out because the DfE wanted to reflect the outcome of the consultation that they took place over the summer. This funding allocation takes into account the outcome of that consultation, and there were 2 main changes as a result that are reflected in our formula coming forward. One thing they consulted on was the use of more up-to-date and accurate data, which underpins both formula. A lot of the data sets that they were using were really out of date, so they've moved to use more up-to-date and accurate data. The other main thing, and Yoki has alluded to it earlier on, was about mainstreaming of the teachers' pay and pension grant, which was previously paid to nursery classes in schools and academies, but now they've combined it. It's included in the maintained nursery supplement funding, but we've had to address it and reflect it for schools and academies, and so we are proposing to implement a quality supplement for schools and academies moving forward. Next slide, please, Raj. So the DfE confirmed our allocation, and our 3 and 4 year old funding rate will increase from £4.66 to £4.93 in 23-24. The funding rate is multiplied by the total number of children expected to access a 15 or 30-hour universal childcare place across the authority. Local authorities, as you know, are required to pass at least 95% of their 3 and 4 year old allocation through, and they can retain 5%. This is referred to as the hourly pass-through rate. The 5% retention allows us to ensure that we support the provision of all of those allocated places through a centrally based budget, and it covers off us funding the base rate, which will be at £4.22 moving forward, notional send of 3p per hour, our deprivation supplements, the quality supplement in relation to the pay and pensions for the schools, our SEN inclusion funding, which is known as SENIF, and any contingency funding that we need to have to manage fluctuations in numbers that's not captured in that January census and might change. It might go up, it might go down in the summer months. Next slide, please, Raj. So this slide shows you the funding rates that we're proposing based on what's come forward. As you can see, most of the rates have gone up slightly. I won't go through them all because they're all displayed in front of you, but it is important to also note that the DfE have raised the Disability Access Fund amount from 800 to 828 per child per year, and the EYPP rates also gone up. So those are the rates that we're proposing to put forward. Next slide, please. Oh,
sorry, 1 second. Oh, that's the final slide on this.
oh, we missed one out, haven't we, somewhere along the line?
I think it was this one.
Yeah, so in addition to that, we also consulted as a local authority on the proposed changes to the funding formula in December 2022. And we wanted to seek the views from all of the sector on were they happy with the way that we were allocating the 3 and 4-year-old funding, to acknowledge the 5% pass-through rate, and in particular in relation to, we were proposing to remove the 8p notional SEN to top up our SENIF funding allocation for low and emerging needs. Based on the feedback that we've got, what we've decided to do is lower the notional SEN to 3 pence per hour, which we will monitor over the next year to see how many children are actually in SEN settings benefiting from that 3 pence an hour, and use that money to increase the amount of funding that we have available to support children via the SENIF application route. I think that's it there, Raj. So basically this paper is coming forward to you to ask Forum to note the funding and methodology that we've used to arrive at the budgets and the hourly rates for the funding block 23-24. To note and approve the budget set aside for SENIF, acknowledging the reduction of notional SEND from 8 pence to 3 pence, and acknowledge that we will monitor how that 3p notional SEND is used moving forward. To note and approve changes in the early years national funding formula with regards to the inclusion of the supplementary supplement for schools and academies in relation to the teachers' pay and pension grade. And if you just to point out that for maintained nurseries, it's all been rolled up into the maintained nursery supplement. To approve the proposed funding rates set out in the paper before you. And finally, just to note the funding that's been allocated to the local authority for maintained nursery schools for 23-24, which is based on the January 2022 census figures that were submitted. And just also note that the scrutiny review that was underway is due to be concluded this week, with their recommendations going forth to executive on the 9th of February, upon which we will then be able to confirm allocations thereafter. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Judy, and I'll and thanks for the information about the votes, and I'll try and clarify that when we move through to there. But first, I think any questions or comments for Judy? Yes, Paul.
Thanks, Chair. Judy, just a quick question on the change in the notional SEM rate down from 8p to 3p. I can see from the consultation that most people didn't want the 8p to go. Is there any particular methodology we use to say, well, we'll reduce it by 5p rather than retaining it? I'm just wondering why 3p, that's all.
Yeah, what we did was when we introduced the SENIF funding in September last year, we only had 160k in the budget available to support those children. We're noting the number of children that are presenting in settings with low and emerging needs as a result of the pandemic, etc. And settings are requesting larger amounts of money to support individual children. So to do that, we needed to top up the funding, and the only way we could really do that was to take it from the notional send pot. Given that everybody wasn't kind of in favour, we thought we'd mop it up to about 300k and see how we fare in the coming year. I mean, it might be that we use all of it, and so then next year we can reflect whether the 3p notional send is actually being used on children with SEND in the settings or not. And if not, we've got the capacity then to top that funding up even more if we need to.
So the rationale is that the SENIF is a more precise way of ensuring that SEND money goes to support children with those additional.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's lovely. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments? Yeah, sorry, I can only see your screen name, El Bowie. Please say if I've mispronounced that. I think you're on mute, sorry.
Sorry about that. I'm happy for Angela to go first because she might ask my questions, the same questions as me. Thank you.
Oh, please go ahead.
Okay. The raise in the rate is so low. It's so incredibly poor. I mean, we're looking at pay increases of nearly 10% because most people in early years are on the living wage, and yet you put forward something just above 2%. That's not viable. We're really struggling. We're really struggling to get people to even work in early years. Also, with regards to moving the 8p down to 3p to supply for lower and upcoming needs, that process hasn't worked properly yet, hasn't worked correctly. So I don't really know where we're going with that. We're putting money into something that, yeah, is in its infancy and doesn't actually work or hit the children needed. With regards to some of this money going towards pensions and pay for teachers, well, I have a workforce. I have to pay them workplace pension. Why should some of that money go towards teachers when I can't even afford to pay my my wonderful team the correct money? I just don't think it's right, and I think it needs voicing. I mean, you're getting £4.93 from £4.66, and I know a lot has got to come from that, but really this is like, yeah, I've just worked out, and I might be wrong, but 2.17% increase when you're looking at a nearly 10% increase in wages. What exactly do you expect us to do?
So to answer some of your questions, the first one around the funding allocation, I'll pass that over to Yoki. The pensions and teachers' pensions element, the DfE have issued guidance on that, and unfortunately we have to adhere to the guidance that's come through, but I totally do understand where you're coming from in relation to that.
How much money is being allocated towards that? So it's a fake rise. It's giving with one hand and taking with another. Am I correct?
Yoki, would you like to respond?
The DfE actually tells us how much went into the 3 and 4-year-old funding, right? Okay, and according to the DfE guidance, 5p of that is for the teachers' pay and pension grant that came from schools and academies. Under their guidance, they've actually advised us that that element is obviously, you know, we need to create a quality supplement for it in order to ensure that, you know, that still filters through to schools and academies.
But not through to nurseries. So that's what the government is saying.
Because
so
that pot of money was taken from schools and academies to go into the 3 and 4-year-old funding rate. It was new money. The DfE did not give us new money. They just put taken that pot of money from schools and academies, teachers pay and pension grant, and to put it into the 3 and 4 year old funding rate.
So
and you can actually see that on the on the DFE website. They've actually shown where the breakdown of where that 5 pence come from.
Okay. So it's an actual increase of 487 then, because they've just moved money from one pot to another.
It looks good for them, but in reality, it's not real increase in funding.
I don't like it being called a quality supplement. I don't know if it needs to be. I find that quite offensive towards early years who aren't teachers.
That is the term the DFE have used.
Okay.
And I think, one of the real difficulties here, that I think is it's a hard thing for the local authority, because, if you're asking, is the money available enough? Well, it probably isn't, but actually it's the proposals are how the local authority use the money that they have been allocated for early years, and how they obviously follow the DFE guidance for that. And I think, some of the terminology is not of the local authority's invention. It is how the Department for Education categorise those things. If we go to Anne-Marie, I don't know if you want to comment on those things, and then we'll move to Angela.
Yeah, thanks, James. I think you've said really what I was going to say. I think it's quite the language that the DFE use, and I think the guidance that we have to operate in, that really the parameters are really tight, in fact, about how we allocate the funds that we can move, what we have to call it. It's very prescribed by the DFE. There is very limited flexibility within that, that we can move and shift. Anything that we can move and shift, and anywhere where we can apply flexibility, we always bring that back to the schools forum to take a vote on that, so that we can get a consistent and a consulted on view. It doesn't mean that necessarily we agree with the language. It doesn't mean necessarily that we agree with the split or the allocation of the funding, but it's not something that we can unilaterally decide upon. Any changes that we make outside of the regulation would need Secretary of State approval, and those changes that we requested from the Secretary of State would also need the support of the majority of the schools forum. So it's not disingenuous to have these conversations, but there is a limit within these conversations as to what we can change. And I think if there's further conversations that Judy, Yoki, colleagues can have to understand how this all works, for any colleagues, whether they're part of the school forum or outside of that, then we're more than happy to put that time aside to help people understand really where we have the flexibility in that to move and shift and to change things. Thanks, James.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. Angela.
I was just going to ask, in terms of the consultation that was carried out by the local authority, they have received 44 responses. It'd be really interesting to see what percentage that was, because the early years has got hundreds in the sector. And, was it a breakdown, and thinking of the early years rep, was that predominantly from maintained nursery schools, or was it a representative of the early years sector? So I wouldn't mind if there would be some feedback on that. I'm not asking for that answer now. Judy, in one of your slides, it did talk about CENIF-P and CENIF Plus.
Yeah.
Is anything going forward with that, or where is that standing at the moment?
So, as you know, we introduced CENIF for low and emerging needs in September, sorry. We have funded over 52 children so far, and we continue to try and make the process as easy as possible for settings. It's been received very well, but as you know, Angela, we all identified that those children that fell in between low and emerging needs and EHCP pay plans. We didn't have a process in place for them. So we asked the question, were people in favour of CENIF Plus, and they are. And Nicola is at this moment working on that guidance, and she'll probably allude to it in her paper moving forward on how we launch and roll that out to the sector. So there's more of a graduated approach of support for children and settings supporting those children moving forward. And your question about how many people responded, I can tell you off the top of my head, it was quite a mixed bag. 18 of them were actually childminders and the rest were mixed, but I can break it down into, you know,
just what percentage of the sector, you know, in terms of the feedback, because I think in terms of the decisions you've taken, and it's not a criticism, but just when those decisions have been made, great that it's cross-sector, but if we're only getting a small percentage of responses, how can we enable people to have their voices heard if they're not contributing? How do we, you know, gather that information in a different way, or help to make sure it goes across the sector, really?
Yeah, fair enough. I'll give you the breakdown, Angela, and we'll take that note forward for future.
Okay, thank you. And then finally, just a bit on contingency funding. You know, how much is being held back for contingency, and does it differ from last year?
Yoki?
Currently, there is nothing built into contingency at the moment. We have assumed it will all go out.
That's what I thought before, but it's the contingency fund to manage fluctuation. So there's nothing built in for 23-24?
No contingency whatsoever.
Thank you. And then finally, just to say that 95% pass through is going through, and 5% is what the local authority can hold back. So I just want to say that, you know, we're not an authority that are holding back more than needs to, and I think some of the fight has to be with central government around early years and raising the profile, and, you know, going to DFE. So just in support of the local authority, really, that, you know, and Anne-Marie said it, you know, sometimes stuff that comes through isn't a local authority decision. It is done from central government.
Thanks, Angela.
Yeah, thanks, Angela. That's great. Lisa, I can see your hand still up if I come back to you.
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to, I'm sure the forum is probably aware, but I'm new to the forum, obviously, but there is a recruitment crisis in early years that we really need to really get the highest base rate we can from what the government have provided. Otherwise, you know, I really fear that we're not going to be able to offer many funded places, and then that's going to reduce the money we do get from government.
Yeah, I mean, I can, you know, I completely accept that point. That is right. I mean, I guess the thing from, as Angela sort of alluded to, it is the local authority are trying to decide how to allocate the money they have given, and it obviously is not within Forum's gift or the local authority's gift to kind of increase that amount. That is, I think, as Angela said,
some councils do. Some councils do add money to their early years provision. I know that's not your decision, but I'm just saying.
I mean, I don't know if Anne-Marie or anyone wants to respond to that on behalf of the local authority, but that isn't within, obviously, Forum.
Yeah, I can come in there, James. I think just, and apologies because there's something odd just happened to my screen. From a local authority perspective, I think what has been agreed, I think it, for colleagues to understand the context that children's services are operating in at the minute. And if I reveal that at present, the services that I run within the local authority are set to lose 23% of their funding for next year. So in context, I know that we would all love to put more money into every part of what we're doing. But like I say, my budget next year for children's services is 23% less than it was this year. So I, you know, like everyone across the sector, it's the reality of what we're dealing with. We have to change how we're delivering services to do them in a different way. This is not me saying we need to do more for less. it's more complicated than that now. You know, we have to transform, we have to do our work in a very different way. I would love to put more money into early intervention. I would love to put more money into SEN. There are lots of things that I would want to do if I had the cash available to do it. But we're operating in a context where the high needs block has seen, the dedicated schools grant has seen an increase, which I'm very, very grateful for. The general fund, which supports all of the services that we are delivering from the council perspective, has seen is seeing a 23% reduction for April next year. So there is no more money, and from a local authority perspective, we are having to transform services to enable us to deliver the things that we're already delivering. So, you know, please don't think that this is me shutting up shop and saying, look, I've got money and I'm not sharing. It's absolutely not. We're grateful, though, you know, frustrated that the DSG has increased because the general fund for children's services has decreased significantly. Thanks, James.
Yeah, thanks, Anne-Marie. Yoki, do you want to come in there?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to bring in a point on the teachers' pay and pension grant. So for maintained nursery schools, the teachers' pay and pension grant has been included in the maintained nursery school supplement. So they will not be able to get the quality element in the 3 and 4 year old funding, so as not to get double funding, basically, according to the DFE. That's all.
Okay, can I just clarify on that? Because I think it's something Judy asked us to potentially vote on. And I just want to clarify whether or not that actually is something that is an option. Because I think, you know, the wording was to approve the change in NNC's early years national funding formula to include the quality supplement for the teachers' pay and pension grant. But is that something that actually is within Forum's gift to approve or not? Or is that something that has to happen as part of the funding formula?
I think it has to happen as part of the funding formula, but Schools Forum have to support it, I believe.
What would happen if we didn't?
If you didn't, then it can't happen. And then it will all be part, you know, we have to review it. Let me just.
So the rationale for it is it's moving in that's what the DFE's guidance is.
Yeah.
And that's the model of the national funding formula.
Yeah. We've got two choices. Schools Forum can either, you know, can either choose to put it in a quality supplement or distribute it under base rate. So basically, so this is what it says in the guidance. Let me just share my screen. Okay, if there's a formula change, including redistribution, so the local authority proposes and decides, but it must be, the Schools Forum must be consulted.
Yeah. So could you just, I don't know who's the best place to do this, whether it's yourself or Judy. So could you just outline the rationale for then rolling that into the quality supplement?
By rolling it into the quality supplement, what we are intending to do is obviously to protect the schools, the schools and academies that have 3 and 4 year olds in them, which previously they would have received teachers' pay and pension grant as a separate grant, which has now been taken away from them, and that's what we're trying to protect.
Okay, thanks.
And that's all we're doing.
Yeah, great. Paul.
Thanks, Chair. I can imagine that the rationale behind this is that schools and academies, it's a stupid thing to call it a quality grant, but schools and academies under their funding agreements are required to have teachers in the Teachers' Pension Fund and support staff in the LGPS. There is no option. It's a requirement under the master funding agreements. And so the supplement presumably is paid to cover the cost of that when the particularly the teachers' pension grant, when the government agreed that the rates went up from, I think it was 18, 19% to 23%. So that was when the supplements came in. And if you are an academy and or maintained school, you are required to be part of those pension schemes, where if you're not an academy and funded in that way, you do have the option of having a stakeholder pension. So I can imagine that's why those supplements were there and targeted in that area. But to call it a quality supplement, I think is as previous colleagues have said, is somewhat insulting. But that's what I think the reason for that targeted approach is.
Thanks, Paul. That's really helpful. Lisa. Sorry, Lisa, you're on mute, I think.
If the pension and pay doesn't go through as a quality supplement and goes through as part of the base rate, does that mean the base rate would increase or decrease?
If it goes into base rate, I don't think it will even increase very much, because if you look at the amount of money we're holding back for, you know, the teachers' pension grant, it is not very substantial. And if it was to be shared amongst everybody, it is, in comparison, it's not substantial.
But every penny counts at the moment, so it would increase it maybe slightly. What, half p? I mean, it's not even half p. I don't even know. It might even be 0.1p. We're only talking 300k at the moment. That's all we are talking about. Mm-hmm.
It's not huge.
But it's a way of, under the national funding formula, of targeting that money to the places where you think that is required, which is not to say that it's not required everywhere. But yeah, okay. Right, I'll propose we move forward to the vote. So I think there's kind of three separate votes on this. So I think the first one is for approval of the reduction of the notional send by 5p and the subsequent use of that money to increase the budget for the Special Educational Needs and Inclusion Fund. So all those in favour of that proposal, if you could raise your hands now, please.
Yeah, got that.
And votes against that proposal?
Okay.
And abstentions? Thanks. And I think the second vote we've got there is approval for the change in the early years national funding formula for NNC to adopt the, regardless of what we think about the name of it, the quality supplement for the schools and academies teachers pay and pension grant. So all those in favour of that proposal, if you could raise your hand.
Yeah.
And votes against?
Okay.
And abstentions?
Yeah, noted.
Thank you. And the third part of that vote is to approval for the funding rates as outlined. I think it's in table 1 of the pack on page 68. And again, obviously, this isn't a vote on empirically whether or not those are enough, but is a vote about how the local authority is proposing to distribute the money that it has been allocated. So votes in favour of approving those rates. If you raise your hand, please.
Yeah, noted.
Votes against?
Yeah.
And abstentions? Perfect. Thank you. That concludes that item, and we shall move swiftly on to item 9. And Nicola, I think, is going to introduce this item.
Yeah, I'll kick off. So this item then is around the high needs block funding allocation, and the forum is asked to note the allocation for 22-23 of 52 million, and then 23-24 the paper outlines the spend for 58 for that period. So people will remember in December I presented the paper outlining current and future spending for unit and mainstream top-up funding. So this paper provides an overview of the projected end of financial year spend for special, independent and alternative provision. And then it gives that at the end of the paper, there's a high level expenditure for the high needs block for next year. It's important, I think, to note that there has been significant improvement in the governance arrangements, including the allocation and monitoring of the high needs block resources. So I'm going to just give a brief overview in relation to special and AP and independent. So we've got 8 special schools, and that serves 1,250 of our children. And that's as part of the disaggregation of the North and West Northamptonshire local authorities. As I've mentioned, we've done significant work to ensure and look at sufficiency and then our governance arrangements. So things like what we've been doing is reviewing the top-up funding and special arrangements across all our special schools, now putting in place financial tracking for all pupils, through half-termly monitoring meetings with special school head teachers, and that's also improved our communication with special school head teachers. And we have a link professional assigned to make regular contact with that ongoing communication. We're looking to greater transparency for schools of their top-up funding breakdown through the introduction of termly reporting. So these have all been the things that we've been doing for over several months. And in terms then of the table that you had presented to you, you will see the spend for this year, and then what we're expecting will be the spend, which takes into consideration the additional places that we've been working on with the head teachers of our special school sector. Then the second part of the report just gives you an outline of the independent special school funding. So we've got 184 children that currently attend our independent schools. Again, we've put a lot of, there's been significant work to ensure appropriate arrangements are in place for the allocation of children, decision-making groups. We've got a team lead to oversee the placement process, negotiate placement rates and sign off invoices as they come through. In recent months, we have retrieved 700,000 worth of overpayments to the sector. So that gives you an idea of the inherited issues that we've taken on. We've done desktop reviews for all the children. So the majority of providers have provided us with information that will now form the basis of our quality assurance framework. And we had our first school site monitoring visit in November. So significant work in that area. In relation to our, and I think what I did want to make just note is that within the figures that we provided, we haven't included residential placements, and there will be, and we've estimated 5% increase on fees. So the alternative provision, there are currently 7 alternative providers, including home tuition. That serves 117 children currently within North Northamptonshire, and similar processes as I've explained for special and for independent have now all been put in place for this sector as well. And again, there is a table there just outlining the spend. It also includes some early help developments that we've been working with some of the trusts within Northamptonshire as well. So in the final table, then you'll see what we're proposed, the forecast for the spend this year. I have to say, I can, in the majority of those areas, feel very confident in the figures that we're forecasting. Might have been a different picture if you'd asked me 12 months ago. And then we've pulled together the draft budget for next year. And it's important to note that as we embed the direction of travel, which is the early help offer for SEND, we will expect that there will be some fluctuation in how we spend our money going forward. But what we're all committed to in this series to make the absolute best use of every penny that we have. So I don't know if Neil, you want to come in on the back of and add anything else to that?
Only to say, repeat what I said earlier, I think a huge amount of work has gone on in this area. We are significantly more confident in the figures that we have before us, but it is still a work in progress. We are still moving, and as Nicola says, these figures will move. What we're setting before you today is a proposed draft, as you'll see, initial budget, and we'll continue to work on that through the coming year as we identify the impact of the changes we've made, and obviously the impact of the changing cohort that we're serving. I think Anne-Marie mentioned earlier, you know, we're grateful for the increase in the high needs block budget that's come through from government. As others have said about other elements of the DSG, it never feels like enough, but you know, to have a £5 million increase is welcome and enables us to deal with some of the issues that are ongoing in this area. As I've said earlier, you know, many local authorities struggle with their high needs block budget, and I think as we look into the future, we can see increasing pressures coming forward. This sets a balanced budget at the start of the year, and we'll endeavour to manage within that and contain expenditure within that. But we all are aware of the pressures in this area and the limited availability of places that we're trying to address, but that has an impact on how we can spend the money. So overall, a firm draft budget that we can put in front of you with some confidence based on a huge amount of work that Nicola's team have done. For your information, really, for you to see what the work is going on and to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Paul.
Hi, thanks, Chair. Nicola, I think that's really clear, the paper, and a very, very good piece of work. My question is, we've touched on it earlier, with the mainstream SEND units, we budgeted this year 4.5 million, and our outturn is going to be a couple of million less. And we've increased on that a bit to 3.25 million for 23-24. My question is, has the underspend due to slippage in the programme, as in we hope to open X number of places and things naturally take more time than we think, so we haven't opened that number of places in SEN units? Or is it because the cost of the units or the cost of the places that we are opening is less than we initially envisaged? And the reason I'm asking is I'm trying to just tease out whether, should the budget this year be similar to the budget last year? If it's just a time lag, but the places are costing a similar amount, then are we going to find ourselves with an underestimate or under budget for 23-24?
Right, okay. I think I understand, but Neil may want to, looking to Neil may want to come in. I mean, the reason why we haven't, I think the consultation process and the work that needs to take place to open a unit is significant. What we have done, as you know, I explained last time, I think historically we've almost given individual packages to individual children attending units. So we've wanted not to go down that approach, because schools need to have clear sight of a budget that they know they're going to have for the next couple of years. So in planning ahead, we're very clear what we think those placements will cost, which is around about 13k a placement, right, with all the things added in. So that I'm not sure. So then that's the bit of what I think you were asking, but I'm not sure I captured everything.
Sorry, Nicola. So from my perspective, we were overly ambitious in setting the budget for this year in terms of what could be delivered in terms of meeting need through SEN units. Okay, that's fair. We've now got a much more realistic program of delivery, which the budget for next year is based on. So that budget is based on, an analysis of what can be delivered. It's not an estimate of what we might deliver. It is what's going through the capital program, what's actually going to deliver those places. As we move forward, I think that budget will increase again because we'll have another tranche coming on after that. So rather than try and do everything at once, which is kind of what the budget implied we would be able to do this year, what you're seeing is a more phased approach where next year there'll be an increase in the SEN units and the year after there'll be an increase in the SEN units. And so that's a more realistic delivery. And of course, what's happened in this year's high needs budget is those children who we thought would go into the units have actually gone elsewhere, and you'll see the increase in those other budgets that's reflected that to some degree. Now those places are more expensive, but the reality is we couldn't get the units online quickly enough. So we are ambitious about what we can do, but I think what you've got in front of you this year is a realistic program rather than something last year that might have been somewhat more aspirational.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So effectively, it's slippage in the program, if you like, as opposed to, or an overambition initially, as opposed to the costs per place are lower than you initially anticipated. And that's what I was asking. I was more concerned that the draft budget we got in this for 23-24 might be too low if we get if those places come on. And that might then put a pressure on the high needs budget once we get halfway through the year. I know it's always easy to underestimate how much work and how much time it takes to get these units up and running. So it doesn't surprise me at all from that point of view. But I just wanted to clarify. I was more worried about next year's budget, to be honest, than potential pressure.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. Apologies. My screen's doing something funny.
James, do you mind if I come in while you're sorting your screen?
No, that's fine. Sorry, I can see you again, Anne-Marie. That's fine.
I think essentially, I think in a nutshell, we are moving from what historically county did and what we inherited and what we've been trying to unpick through the last almost 2 years now. Previously, all SEN decisions were made about individuals. Money was attached to individuals, and by its very nature, when you're incrementally sorting every child out as an individual child, which of course they are all individuals, but it becomes very, very expensive. And actually what we're trying to do here is we're trying to apply and learn the lessons from the commission of places for children who were looked after, and other lessons that we've looked at from the secure estate, different areas that we look in, and we're taking a strategic commissioning approach, because what we can understand from our data in a way that wasn't ever visible to us previously until the work that Nicola and the team have done over the last 12 months is we understand the children that are coming through, we understand what the needs are of those children collectively. That enables us to take a strategic commissioning approach. So rather than be surprised every time a new child drops into the inbox and we do an education, health and care plan and say, where do we start with this one? We know that actually the children that are coming through, what their needs are, we know what our trends are, we know what our analysis is. More importantly, particularly when we're talking at high needs, we know what our colleagues in the health services, we know what our colleagues in NHFT can and can't provide for us. We know where the delays are in waiting lists, and some of those are eye-watering, but we know and have a better understanding about how that whole system is working together. So what we're trying to do really is to get ahead of the curve and make sure that the provision that we believe we're going to need is available to us when we need it. So I think probably this year, now, next year, and maybe even the year after, we might be in a 3-year window where we're trying to conclude those children who have always been individually commissioned for to get into a position where strategically across the board, we know what availability we have in what units for which children. And it may be in that there may be voids or there may be gaps, or we might be carrying places and availability in some of our units that aren't always being used. And one might argue, well, isn't that a waste of money? But actually, over the longer term, or the medium to longer term even, that's a much better way for us to do business, because first of all, it will enable us to get children into school places more rapidly and children into the right school places more rapidly. And it will also allow us to reduce cost because we're commissioning collectively and strategically. So, it may not feel very different, and I appreciate that. But for head teachers on the ground today, it might not feel massively different, and it might feel like there's delays. But I hope by the time we're getting into the new school year next year and some of these units are up and running and we know where that availability is, first of all, we'll all know where that availability is and what it looks like, and we'll know what we're working towards. Thanks, James.
Yeah, thank you. And I think I'd really echo that. The two things I think that, are really encouraging are the really careful auditing of current provision and having a handle on spend. And exactly as you say, that kind of proactive approach to making sure that, we're well placed to deal with with the students with additional needs. Marie.
Thanks, James. Given the previous agenda item and the need for early intervention to happen as much as possible, I just wondered what the rationale was for having spent 500,000 this year on early years, but only budgeting half of that for next year.
So I think I might pick that up. So we didn't, as per the paper, we didn't spend £500,000 in this year, and it goes back to a point Angela made earlier, which is that this came in partway through the year, and so we actually spent more like the £250,000 that's budgeted. For next year, what we're trying to do is set that in the context of the differing graduated response that Judy set out earlier. So there will be, the SEN that's met in provision, there will be the CENIF funding that's available, and then the CENIF, the higher level CENIF stuff that's in here as well. So this is an estimate. This is the starting point of what that graduated response might look like. And as I say, through the year that might vary, but given everything that we're trying to do in terms of support within settings and all those sorts of things, this is based on the expenditure we've had to date, an estimate of what will come through for next year and meet this. Because remember, that doesn't then cover into the statutory stuff when it falls into EHCP and it goes, beyond that. So it's part of a graduate response on one level of it. So I take your point. There may well be pressure on that area, and it may be something we want to revisit later in the year. But at this point in time, within that context, we think it's a reasonable estimate. We shall see how that goes. We'll monitor it, and the forum will be kept up to date with that. If the need is there to move money around and put more money into that area of the high needs block, then we'll have that discussion at the time. But I absolutely take your point. But it is part of a new graduated response, and Judy may wish to comment as well on that.
Nicola, do you want to respond to that?
Well, the only other thing. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, that's okay. The other thing I wanted to add more generally, Marie, is that when you consider that we spend 41 million, I've just talked about 41 million on independence, and when you break that down, you look at the costs, it's quite interesting, special and AP, and then the spends, if you're looking at, is about 10.5 on, and that's probably about 2% of our 4% EHCP children, but doesn't include all our SEND support children. So where I think we want to get, where we're trying to move to, is to shift some of that, particularly independent funding, over into what we spend in our early help pot, if you like, which is going to be the early help funding that we provide for mainstream schools. Plus then, developing further the unit provision. So that's probably what's, the direction of travel that's going to happen over the next couple of years. And the authority is really well set and well cited on that. So it's kind of like, that's a bit more of the bigger picture. And I think that's where the government is really encouraging us to go as well. But it's going to take time.
I understand that. I think just given the previous agenda item and sort of saying the county council, local authorities' hands are tied with regards to early years funding, here we've got an opportunity to invest in early years SEND funding, where we know every pound spent in early years is far better spent than a pound spent later in a child's life. Is this not our opportunity to give something to the early years sector to support their SEND children for early intervention?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's worth mentioning or saying, isn't it, that this pot didn't exist at all.
Exactly.
So this is the start of an investment. It might seem like a small investment, and we take your point, and it may well grow. And I'd be happy if it grew. If we were to invest here and reduce expenditure further, as Nicola said, in other areas, absolutely keen to do that. And I say again, this is a budget. This is a starting point, a draft budget of where we think we're going to be. Actual expenditure will be driven by need, as it is across all of the high needs budget, within resources, of course. And so I think we want to be somewhat flexible on this, but set out what we think is a reasonable starting point budget and move on from there. But you're absolutely right. We are absolutely with you in early help, early intervention, early years. And when I look at outcomes for children at each key stage, that's very apparent. The investment at the early years and in primary education is really, really key. So in principle, absolutely, like I say, this is a budget that wasn't there previously, we've created, so we are investing, and we may need to invest more as we go along. But like I say, Judy might want to come in on detail.
Yeah, just to say as well, we are about to undertake an audit with the whole of the early years sector on training needs and identified training needs, and we're planning on putting a more robust package of training support together for the sector as well, because we recognise that over the past year we haven't necessarily been able to offer as much training as we'd like. So over the next month or so, there'll be a questionnaire coming out so we can understand what those training needs are across the sector, and think we can support you in that respect as well. Then it all contributes to supporting you to support children moving forward.
Thanks, Judy. Angela.
Hi, if we can just have some clarity. In paper 9, we're talking about 250k being ring fence for early years. In Judy's paper, we talk about 300,000 for SENEF. So 300,000, which we're just taking a vote on to go to SENEF. So what is it that we're actually budgeting for? Because we're saying we're budgeting now for 250. In the paper, it's 350. Does that include the proposal for SENEF Plus? Does it include the notional send? I'm now unclear about how much money is actually going to be put into SEN for early years and what's actually being budgeted.
Okay, this may be dangerous, and I think I have to get Judy to consult. I think they're two different pots, so it's both. They are two different pots. So it's 300 from the early years block, Angela, and 250 from the high needs block. So 550 over.
Okay, so high needs block, then can I just clarify, if the money is coming out of high needs, is that when children have education and healthcare plans? Or will this is SENEF Plus, which is prior to EHCPs. I hope Judy's nodding.
Yeah, I am.
Thank you for the clarity.
Great, thank you. Any further questions on that item? Great, and sounds like good news to finish with, to have both available. Perfect, so we'll move on to item 10, which is an update on Homes for Ukraine funding, and hopefully more good news from Neil.
Well, it starts with an apology, because I think at the last meeting I said this would be sorted by the end of the year, and it's not. The reason for that was the figures we got from the government didn't tie up with our figures, so we've had to write quite a number of schools to correct their figures to make sure we're doing it correctly, because once we've given the money out, we can't get it back again and say, oops, that was an error. So I am saying confidently by the end of the month we'll have distributed this money, and apologise for the delay, but it was due to a difference between what the government thought was the placements in North Northants and what we thought were the placements in North Northants, and it was more important to get it right first time than to rush the money out. So apologies, it is a priority for us. I'm hoping to get it done by the end of January.
Great, thanks, Neil. Any questions or comments on that? Yeah, Marie.
Thanks, James. How are the local authority going to know the figures? Because lots of LAs have a form on their website where schools can report the numbers of pupils on roll who are part of the Homes for Ukraine scheme. But as far as I know, you don't know how many Ukrainian children we are educating.
So it's only for children who were placed through Homes for Ukraine. So it's not for all Ukrainian children. And so the admissions service should know who those children are and where they're placed. But it didn't align with what the government thought we had, which is what's caused the delay. So if you're concerned, I'm happy to share the numbers that we now think it is, or that we know it is. But you know, we because of the process by which the Homes for Ukraine children are placed, we know they've come into the area, we know they've gone into the admission service, and we can see where they've gone. And what the confusion ended up being was the DfE saw that as a different number than we did. So like I say, that's what caused the delay. But I'm happy to share the number. We want to get it right first time, as I say. So if you're concerned that you've got more than we think you've got, then happy to have a conversation. Might be best to have a conversation with Jan Baines in admission about that. Or I'm happy to raise it with Jan just to say, can she check?
Or Neil, is it? I mean, I don't know whether it, whether there would be issues with sharing this. I just wonder if you could use almost the head teacher newsletter to send out how many you think are in each school, and for schools to confirm.
Yeah, I'm really happy to. We've only just finished compiling numbers, so we've got a finished list now. I'll talk to Jan and we'll make sure that's shared either through that route or another route, so head teachers can be confident that they're going to get the right payments at the right time, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think that sounds perfect, because otherwise I think if it's beholden for schools to contact Jan, she might well end up overwhelmed with lots of different calls, whereas obviously if schools can check against the records you hold, then they only need to get in touch if there's a discrepancy.
Yeah, that'd be really helpful.
Yeah, great. And I'll move on to item number 11, which is the Forum Forward plan. So Raj, over to you.
Yeah, the next meeting of the forum is scheduled for the 15th of March. And obviously meeting invitations and papers and everything will be sent in due course for that.
Great, thank you. And any other urgent business? Wonderful. Thanks everyone for your contributions today. And I now declare the meeting closed. And I hope you enjoy what's left of your Thursday afternoon.